He was fired in disgrace from the company he built, from nothing but this devastating failure was the best thing that ever happened to him and would eventually change the way we all live. For more powerful stories that inspire, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Today, I am going to tell you a truly incredible story. It's a story about a man who started with nothing. He faced rejection and he faced failure, but he still managed to change the entire world. His name was Steve Jobs. If you have ever used an iPhone or a MacBook, or even if you have just admired how beautifully designed a product can be, then you have already experienced his legacy. But Steve Jobs was not born into success. He was not handed anything on a silver plate. His life was full of ups and downs, full of triumphs and heartbreaks. And yet he never ever gave up. This story is more than just a biography. It is a lesson in resilience, in creativity, and in never-ending hope. By the end of this story, I hope you will feel inspired to chase your own dreams, no matter how big or how impossible they might seem. So get comfortable and let's dive into the story of Steve Jobs. The man who proved that sometimes the crazy ideas are the ones that can change the world. Steve Jobs was born on February 24, 1955, in San Francisco, California. But from the very beginning of his life, there were challenges. His biological parents, Joanne Schiebel and Abdul Fattah Jandali, were young university students. They were not married, and they felt they were not ready to raise a child. So they made the difficult decision to give him up for adoption. Imagine this for a moment. Steve began his life not knowing his birth parents. He did not know who they were or why they had to give him away. It was a difficult start. Yet this difficult beginning did not stop him from becoming one of the most influential people in history. Steve was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, a kind and humble couple who lived in a small town called Mountain View, California. Paul was a mechanic, a man who loved working with tools and his hands. Clara was an accountant. They were not rich, but they gave Steve a home that was filled with love and care. From a very young age, it was clear that Steve was different. He wasn't quite like the other kids in his neighborhood. While the other children were busy playing outside, Steve was often inside busy asking questions. How does this machine work? Why does this toy move like that? What would happen if I took this apart? Steve's father, Paul, noticed this deep curiosity in his son. He decided to encourage it. He started to teach Steve how to build things. Together, they would spend hours in their garage fixing cars, radios, and even small gadgets. It was in that garage, surrounded by tools and spare parts, that Paul told Steve something that stuck with him forever. He said, "If you're going to build something, you have to make sure it's the best it can be. Pay attention to every single detail." This advice became the foundation of Steve's future success. Steve was smart, there was no doubt about it. But he was not a perfect student. In fact, he was quite the opposite. He was often bored in school because he found the lessons too easy. He felt they were moving too slowly. One of his teachers said that Steve was so smart that the regular school just couldn't keep up with him. He needed something more challenging to keep his mind busy. But Steve wasn't just smart. He was also a little mischievous. He loved playing pranks on his teachers and his classmates. One time, he even set off a small, harmless explosive prank at school. While most kids his age were just trying to pass their exams, Steve was already thinking outside the box, testing the limits. When Steve was about 10 years old, his family moved to a town called Los Altos, California. This place was very special. It was the heart of what we now call Silicon Valley, a place where technology was booming. It was a place full of engineers and new ideas. One day, Steve saw a computer for the very first time. Now, it wasn't like the laptops or desktops we use today. This computer was massive, almost the size of a room, with flashing lights and spinning tapes. But Steve was fascinated. He looked at this giant machine and thought to himself, "This machine can solve problems. What else can it do?" That moment sparked a fire in Steve's heart. From that day on, he wanted to learn everything he could about computers and technology. As Steve grew older, his curiosity turned into a real passion. In high school, he met a young man who would change his life forever. His name was Steve Wozniak. Steve Wozniak, or Woz, as his friends called him, was a genius when it came to electronics. He could build the most amazing gadgets from scratch just using spare parts. The two Steves quickly became best friends. They spent hours together talking about electronics and dreaming about the future. They were bonded by their shared love for technology. One of their first inventions together was a little device called the Blue Box. This device allowed people to make free long-distance phone calls. Of course, it was illegal, but it showed how creative and bold they were. It was a sign of things to come. Steve later said, "Without the Blue Box, there would be no Apple." After high school, Steve went to Reed College in Oregon. But here is a surprising part of his story he dropped out after just 6 months. Why Steve realized that college wasn't teaching him what he truly wanted to learn. He felt he was just wasting his parents' hard-earned money on classes that didn't feel meaningful to him, so he made the brave decision to leave. But he didn't give up on learning. Instead of going to the required classes, Steve started attending only the classes that truly interested him. One of those classes was calligraphy, the art of beautiful handwriting. At the time, this seemed like a useless skill. Why would a future technology genius care about fonts and handwriting? But years later, when Steve was designing the very first Macintosh computer, that calligraphy class came back to him. It helped him create the beautiful, elegant fonts that we still use on our computers today. This teaches us a very important lesson. Never stop learning. You never know when something that seems small or unimportant will become incredibly useful in the future. In 1974, Steve went on a long journey to India. He was searching for something deeper in his life, something beyond just money or success. In India, Steve learned about spirituality and the importance of focus. He learned how to think deeply, how to stay calm under pressure, and how to keep his mind sharp and clear. When he returned to the United States, Steve wasn't just a young man anymore. He was a man with a vision. He wanted to create something truly special, something that would change the world. At the young age of 21, Steve and his friend Steve Wozniak started their first company. They didn't have a fancy office or a big budget. They worked out of a small, cluttered garage in Steve's parents' house. They named their company Apple. Why Apple? Because Steve loved the simplicity and freshness of the fruit. He wanted his company to feel the same way, simple, fresh, and creative. Their very first product was the Apple II, a small computer that they built with their own hands. It wasn't perfect, but it was the beginning of something extraordinary. The early life of Steve Jobs teaches us that success does not come from being perfect or from following all the rules. It comes from passion, from hard work, and from never, ever giving up. Steve believed in himself even when others didn't. He didn't let his difficult start or any rejection or failure stop him from dreaming. Steve and Wozniak worked tirelessly on their first product, the Apple I. It wasn't just a machine to them. It was a vision of what technology could do for ordinary people. They started selling the Apple I to small computer shops and to technology enthusiasts. It was not a huge commercial success, but it earned them enough money to start thinking bigger. Steve was not satisfied. He believed that the future of computing was not just for tech experts. He believed it was for everyone. His dream was to create a computer that was so simple and so beautiful that anyone, even a child, could use it. This powerful idea led to the creation of their next product, the Apple II. The Apple was revolutionary. It was one of the very first personal computers that came with color graphics and was ready to use straight out of the box. It became a massive success. It made Apple a multi-million-dollar company seemingly overnight. Steve, at just 23 years old, became a millionaire. But Steve wasn't really excited about the money. What truly drove him, what pushed him forward, was his dream to change the world. Steve was not an easy person to work with. He was very demanding. He demanded excellence in everything. If something wasn't perfect in his eyes, he would push his team to start all over again. Some people said he was difficult, even impossible. But Steve believed in one simple thing. If you want to create something truly great, you cannot settle for good enough. Said for Steve, every small detail mattered, whether it was the design of a computer, the curve of its corner, or the way the company logo looked. He wanted it to be perfect. He once said, "When you look at a product, you shouldn't just see how it works. You should feel it. It should inspire you." This deep obsession with quality and beauty is what made Apple products stand out from everything else. By the early 1980s, Steve had a new vision. He wanted to create a computer that wasn't just functional, but was also beautiful, friendly, and incredibly easy to use. This dream became the Macintosh, or as we know it, the Mac. The Macintosh was not just another product, it was a whole new experience. It introduced things that we all take for granted today, like the computer mouse and the graphical user interface. The idea of clicking on little pictures or icons instead of typing complicated commands. Steve believed that technology should be human-centered. He often said, "Computers are not about technology. They are about helping people unlock their creativity." The Macintosh launched in 1984, and Steve made sure it had a dramatic introduction. He hired a famous director to create a television advertisement called 1984, which was shown during the Super Bowl. The ad showed Apple as a company that would break all the old rules and free people from boring traditional technology. But success was not always a straight line. Despite his brilliance, Steve's intense personality created conflicts within the company. Many people at Apple thought he was too demanding, too stubborn, and too controlling. In 1985, a power struggle erupted between Steve and Apple's board of directors. And then something shocking happened. The board decided to remove him from the company he had created. Imagine that for a moment. Being fired from your own company. For Steve, this was devastating. He felt betrayed, humiliated, and completely lost. But much later in his life, he said, "Getting fired from Apple was the best thing that could have ever happened to me. It freed me to think creatively again." Instead of giving up, Steve used this incredible setback as a chance to start over. He founded a new company called Next, which focused on creating advanced computers for universities and businesses. Around the same time, Steve bought a small animation studio called Pixar. At first, Pixar struggled, but Steve believed in its potential. He worked with a team of talented artists and technicians who shared his vision of storytelling. In 1995, Pixar released its first movie, Toy Story. It was the world's first fully computer-animated film, and it became an instant classic, changing movies forever. While Steve was busy building Next and Pixar, his old company Apple was struggling. Without Steve's vision and his leadership, the company had started to fail. By the mid-1990s, Apple was on the brink of bankruptcy. In 1997, Apple made a bold, desperate decision. They invited Steve Jobs to come back to the company. This was his moment of redemption. When Steve returned, he found Apple in chaos. Products were not selling as company was losing a lot of money and people had lost faith. But Steve was not scared. He had a plan. One of his very first decisions was to simplify everything. He canceled dozens of unnecessary projects and decided to focus on just a few key products that could truly make a difference. In 1998, Steve introduced the iMac. This was a computer that was unlike anything people had ever seen before. It was colorful, it was simple, and it was fun. But it wasn't just about the looks, it was also fast and powerful. The iMac became a huge success, and it put Apple back on the map. It showed the world that Apple was no longer a failing company. Steve was back, and so was his magic. He made Apple focus on simplicity. Instead of creating dozens of different products, he asked his team, "Why don't we just focus on 4?" He simplified everything: fewer products, fewer designs, and clearer goals. And then, Steve did something that surprised everyone. He announced a partnership with Apple's biggest rival, Microsoft. Many people in the Apple community hated this idea. But Steve said, "If we want to survive, we need to be practical." The deal brought Apple much-needed cash, and more importantly, it made people believe in the company again. By the late 1990s, Steve was ready to revolutionize Apple once more. His vision was simple: to create products that are beautiful, powerful, and incredibly easy to use. In 2001, Apple launched the iPod, a tiny device that could hold 1,000 songs in your pocket. This was a complete game changer. Before the iPod, people carried around bulky CDs or tapes. But with the iPod, music became truly portable and personal. Steve didn't just sell a gadget, he sold an idea. He said, "With the iPod, you can carry your entire music library with you everywhere you go." The iPod wasn't just about technology, it was about freedom, creativity, and joy. It became a cultural phenomenon, and millions of people all over the world fell in love with it. Steve was a very unique leader. He didn't manage Apple like a regular CEO. He treated the company like an artist creating a masterpiece. He paid close attention to every single detail: the colors, the fonts, the packaging, even the way a product felt in your hands. He believed that design and functionality should work together seamlessly. Steve once said, "Design is not just what it looks like and feels like. Design is how it works." But Steve could also be very tough. He demanded excellence from his team. Sometimes he was blunt and impatient. People who worked for him said he was intense, but they also admitted that his incredible passion pushed them to achieve things they thought were impossible. Then in 2007, Steve introduced the product that would change the world forever: the iPhone. The iPhone was not just a phone. It was a camera, a music player, and a powerful computer, all in one small device. Before, the iPhone phones were often clunky and hard to use. Steve wanted to create something so simple and so intuitive that anyone could use it. Standing on stage, he said, "The iPhone is a product of simplicity. It's the best phone, the best music player, and the best internet communicator. We are putting all of this in your pocket." The iPhone was an instant success. People loved its sleek design, its amazing touchscreen, and the way it made their lives easier. It wasn't just a product anymore. It became a part of people's everyday lives. Steve didn't just create products. He created a new way of thinking. He believed that technology should empower people to do more, to dream bigger, and to express themselves. He once explained, "Technology is at its best when it becomes invisible, when you don't even think about the device you're using. That's when magic happens." Steve's philosophy wasn't just about selling gadgets. It was about inspiring people to achieve their full potential. In 2008, Steve launched the App Store. This was an online marketplace where people could download applications or apps for their iPhones. This simple idea completely changed how people used technology. Before, the App Store phones were limited to basic functions like calling and texting. But with apps, people could play games, learn new skills, connect with friends, and access information from all over the world. The App Store created amazing opportunities for millions of software developers and entrepreneurs. Steve didn't just build a product, he built an entire ecosystem that allowed creativity to thrive. While Steve was busy changing the world, he was also fighting a quiet, personal battle. In 2003, he was diagnosed with a rare form of pancreatic cancer. At first, Steve didn't take the conventional medical route. He tried alternative treatments, believing he could heal himself naturally. But as time passed, his health got worse. Eventually, he had surgery and was able to return to work. Even during his illness, Steve never stopped innovating. He famously said, "I want to put a dent in the universe before I go." His determination and his work ethic inspired everyone around him. Despite his health challenges, he continued to lead Apple with the same passion and energy as always. In 2010, Steve introduced the iPad. This was a device that was bigger than a phone, but smaller than a laptop. At first, many people were skeptical. They asked, "Why do we need this?" But Steve believed the iPad could create a completely new category of devices. It was perfect for reading books, watching movies, and browse the internet. He said, "The iPad is the most advanced technology, but it feels so natural and simple to use. It's magical." And once again, Steve proved the critics wrong. The iPad became a massive success, showing the world that innovation has no limits. By 2010, Steve Jobs had become more than just a CEO. He was a global icon, a symbol of innovation and pure determination. However, behind the scenes, his health was deteriorating. The battle with pancreatic cancer that had begun years earlier was now catching up to him. Despite his illness, Steve refused to slow down. He often said, "You only get one life. Make it count." Every day, he pushed himself to do his best work. He believed in living with purpose, no matter how much time he had left. Under Steve's leadership, Apple had reached incredible new heights. By 2011, it had become one of the most valuable companies in the world. Millions of people owned iPhones, iPads, and Mac computers. Apple was not just a company anymore. It was a lifestyle. Steve's vision went beyond just creating great products. He wanted to build an ecosystem, a family of products where everything worked together seamlessly. For example, you could take a picture on your iPhone, and a moment later, you could see it on your Mac. You could start writing an email on your iPad and finish it on your laptop. He believed technology should make life easier, not more complicated. This powerful idea became the foundation of Apple's success. While Steve was busy transforming the world, he also cherished his family. He was married to Laureen Powell Jobs, a strong and intelligent woman who supported him through all of his challenges. Together, they had 3 children, Reed, Aaron, and Eve. Steve also had a daughter, Lisa, from a previous relationship. He wasn't always the perfect father, especially in his early busy years, but over time, he worked hard to build a stronger relationship with his kids. Steve often told his children, "Don't settle for anything less than what you love. Follow your passions, and the rest will fall into place." Despite his demanding schedule, he made time for family dinners and simple, quiet moments. He loved walking in the garden with Laureen, discussing new ideas and reflecting on life. Even as his health worsened, Steve kept thinking about the future. He was not just focused on the next product, he was focused on the next generation. Steve wanted Apple to remain innovative even long after he was gone. He worked closely with his team, sharing his ideas and mentoring them. One of his most famous quotes was, "Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things." This meant focusing only on what truly mattered and ignoring all the other distractions. In 2011, Apple introduced Siri, a virtual assistant that could understand and respond to spoken commands. Siri was another example of Steve's vision for the future technology that felt natural and intuitive. Steve wanted technology to feel like an extension of the human mind. Siri was just the beginning of a new era of artificial intelligence, showing how far Apple could go. In August 2011, Steve made a very difficult decision. He stepped down as Apple's CEO, knowing that his health would no longer allow him to lead the company he loved. He wrote a heartfelt letter to the Apple board and to all of its employees. He said, "I have always said if there ever came a day when I could no longer meet my duties and expectations as Apple's CEO, I would be the first to let you know. Unfortunately, that day has come." Steve chose Tim Cook, his trusted colleague, as his successor. He believed that Tim shared his values and his vision for the company. Although Steve stepped down, he remained closely involved with Apple's projects. He spent his remaining days ensuring that Apple would continue to thrive. In his final months, Steve spent more time with his family. He often talked about the meaning of life and the importance of leaving a legacy. He said, "Being the richest man in the cemetery doesn't matter to me. What matters is that I've done something wonderful for the world." Steve loved to sit in his garden, surrounded by nature. He found peace in the simple things, watching the sunrise, listening to music, and holding hands with Laureen. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. His death was felt as a global loss, and millions of people around the world mourned him. In 2005, a few years before his death, Steve Jobs delivered a commencement speech at Stanford University. This speech has since become one of the most iconic speeches in history. His message was not just for the students graduating that day. It was for anyone who is striving to find purpose and meaning in their life. He started by saying, "Today I want to tell you 3 stories from my life. That's it. No big deal. Just 3 stories." Each story revealed a powerful lesson he had learned during his incredible journey. His first story was about connecting the dots. Steve shared how he dropped out of college because he didn't see its value, but he stayed around to attend classes that truly interested him, like that calligraphy class. At the time, it seemed meaningless, but years later, the skills he learned in that calligraphy class helped him design the beautiful fonts for the Macintosh computer, which revolutionized how people used computers. He told the students, "You can't connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backward. So you have to trust that the dots will somehow connect in your future." This lesson teaches us that every experience, no matter how small or uncertain it feels, can lead to something bigger down the road. His second story was about love and loss. Steve spoke honestly about being fired from Apple, the company he had started from nothing. He called it one of the most devastating experiences of his life, but also one of the most freeing. He said, "Sometimes life hits you in the head with a brick. Don't lose faith. I'm convinced that the only thing that kept me going is that I loved what I did." This story reminds us all to keep moving forward even when life doesn't go as we planned. His third and final story was about death. Steve's final story was about facing his own mortality. He shared how being diagnosed with cancer completely changed the way he looked at life. It reminded him that our time is precious and that it should not be wasted on things that do not matter. He said, "Your time is limited, so don't waste it living someone else's life. Have the courage to follow your heart and intuition. They somehow already know what you truly want to become. This was his most powerful message live authentically. Versucht with purpose and live with passion. After his passing in 2011, Steve Jobs' influence did not fade. In fact, it grew even stronger. Apple continued to innovate, releasing products like the Apple Watch and AirPods, and pushing the boundaries of technology. But Steve's legacy is not just about technology. It's about the way he made people think. He taught us to challenge the status quo. Steve always believed in questioning the ordinary and striving for the extraordinary. He taught us to focus on quality. He once said, "Be a yardstick of quality." Some people aren't used to an environment where excellence is expected. He pushed himself and his team to deliver their absolute best work every single time. And he taught us to stay hungry, stay foolish. These words, which he borrowed from a magazine he loved, became his life motto. They remind us to always keep learning, to keep dreaming, and to keep taking risks. Steve Jobs didn't just create products. He created tools that changed how people live, work, and communicate. Think about it. The iPhone made the world more connected than ever before. The Mac gave artists, writers, and creators a powerful platform to express themselves. The iPad transformed education, making learning more interactive and accessible. Steve's ideas reached every corner of the globe. Millions of people now use technology not just for work, but to tell their own stories, to explore their creativity, and to chase their dreams. Steve's life was filled with incredible ups and downs, but he always found a way to turn challenges into opportunities. Here are some of the most important lessons his journey teaches us. 1. Believe in yourself. Even when people doubted him, Steve trusted his own vision. He showed us that self-belief is the foundation of all success. 2. Think big. Steve didn't just want to create products. He wanted to change the entire world. He believed in setting ambitious goals and working tirelessly to achieve them. 3. Never stop learning. Steve was always curious and eager to learn new things. He showed us that growth comes from being open to new ideas and new experiences. And 4. Follow your passion. Steve's greatest successes came from doing what he truly loved. He proved that when you follow your passion, work becomes more meaningful. Steve Jobs once said, "The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do." And he was right. Steve Jobs' life was proof that one person armed with passion, vision, and determination can make a lasting impact on the world. His story is not just about success, it's about resilience, about creativity, and about the power of believing in yourself. No matter where you are in your life, Steve's journey reminds us that it is never too late to dream big and to make a difference. So let's take inspiration from Steve Jobs' extraordinary life and remember, our time is limited, but our potential is infinite. Thank you for listening. I'll see you in the next story.